Well, hello everyone. Sorry for that. I couldn't figure out how to get one presentation off and the other one on. So now we're up and running. It's so great that you guys are on here. Sorry for the delay. So it's for after. So I hope your week is going well. It's definitely a different world out there, which is kind of why we're kind of talking in the office. I think stress and thyroid could be a really good topic right about now. If you guys, kind of listened on last night or Monday night, Dr. Maynard actually did a whole talk on the immune system. So if that's something that you guys did not get a chance to listen to, you can always email me and I'll put I'll talk about it at the end too. You guys can email me and we can send you out that recording if you'd like to hear it if you weren't able to attend. But we're going to do this probably a lot right now because this is kind of a great way to kind of reach our patients, reach the public. Just try to be something different and positive, and give you guys some thoughts around how to deal with stress, how to deal with the immune system. As we're all sitting in our house, probably eating different, maybe eating better. There's a lot of things going on. So I think we're going to do this, look at that twice a week, between Jake, who's our counselor, myself, Dr. Maynard, and really just trying to hit different topics. So even if you guys have a topic that you'd like to hear, that could be really great to email me, or you can email the office at info@integratedhealthdenver.com. Those are great things because we just want to hear from you guys and we can put together these different types of talks. So let's talk about how stress can cause thyroid problems. I think this is something that probably everybody has been kind of curious about over the years. One of the things that I think people don't realize is that how much stress can actually play a role on the thyroid. We always talk about how the thyroid can play a role on the body, from things like metabolism and weight and energy, but there's a lot of things that impact the thyroid. I actually give like 3-day seminars on this topic. So, I'm sitting there going, well, how do I make this, a good 30-40 minute talk, and try to give you some cool content. But honest to goodness, I mean, we could talk forever on this topic. So I want to give some cool stuff. We'll talk about stress. We'll talk about thyroid. I'll show you a couple things to look at, and then talk about some of the things you guys can do. Because I think when we talk about where we're at in this moment with, with our society and our culture just totally different, it does create a lot of stress and it creates a lot of angst. And so this is something that I really kind of wanted to address and say, hey, let's talk about stress, and it can affect thyroid, but also it can affect your immune system as well. So you'll probably hear me touch on that throughout this conversation this evening. Now, the first place I wanted to start off with is, I can make thyroid incredibly complicated. I actually can draw the entire physiology all the way down to diagrams of tyrosine rings, and how they attach, and the different molecular structures. So I can get super geeky, but this right here is like your simple way of looking at the thyroid that actually is just as effective. So I'll kind of talk through this because a lot of people may not know, just the simple basics. When you look at thyroid physiology, the pituitary is actually not where it starts. Believe it or not, a lot of people don't realize that it actually starts up higher in the brain. Another area is actually called the hypothalamus. And even it doesn't start there, it actually starts even higher up in the brain, with utilizing dopamine and serotonin. Really fascinating stuff that, when we actually get into thyroid physiology, you can actually have a neurological consequence that affects the thyroid. And it's interesting how many people over the years, we say, hey, we want to do an exam on you for your thyroid condition. They're like, what? Or I'll say, hey, I want to check out your neurology. And they're like, what does it have to do with thyroid function? And actually, that's kind of where it all starts, is in the brain. So where we're going to kind of start, for simplistic sake, is at the pituitary, because the pituitary sends down a signal that's called thyroid stimulating hormone. What's kind of cool about the pituitary is everything that comes out of the pituitary is pretty much stimulating. So there's a thyroid stimulating hormone and a follicle stimulating hormone, and the pituitary kind of tells everybody what to do. And really, the pituitary does this all based on what's going on in physiology. So if the thyroid or the if the brain doesn't think there's enough hormones, then it tells the pituitary, "Hey, I need you to be a slave master." So it's kind of like, I need to break out the whip and just get these people working to produce thyroid hormones. And that's kind of the pituitary's job, is that it's almost like in those movies, where you have like the king and then you have like his enforcers, kind of, so to speak. And that's kind of what the pituitary does, is it really tells that thyroid what to do by sending down a TSH signal. So a lot of times, most of you will hear about TSH being elevated, and this is related to hypothyroidism. So when the thyroid doesn't do its job, the pituitary yells harder and louder and louder and louder, and this is what we start looking at with hypothyroid function. Now, the thyroid, inside the thyroid, is actually cool. It's like a butterfly shaped gland that produces, well, actually, it doesn't produce. It really kind of makes, it's like a manufacturing plant. And inside this manufacturing plant, it uses things like iodine and tyrosine, and it forms, it's almost like this it's called a colloidal space. It's almost like this goopy space that actually can make cool stuff. And it makes actually T1 and T2, and it makes like these cool ribbons, like you would see in a manufacturing plant. And then what the thyroid does is it kind of splits them apart. And so basically, if you have a bunch of T2s and you put them together, that's what makes T4. And so the thyroid actually makes predominantly T4, which kind of confuses people because you always think, it goes 3 and then 4. But actually, with the thyroid, we start off with T4. So the basically just tells you there's 4 iodine molecules. And then within this iodine molecular um, formation, what happens is your body then takes one of those iodines off, and it makes T3. And T3 is actually where all the magic happens. So a lot of people look at T4 and they look at TSH, but honest to goodness, T3 is where all the cool stuff happens. So from there, T3 actually goes to every single cell in the body, and it actually stimulates the mitochondria. And the mitochondria are what we learned in high school. If you remember this, it was the powerhouse of the cells, kind of like the battery pack. So this is what keeps the cell moving and active, is the T3 itself activating that mitochondria. So if we don't have enough T3, then you see all the energy systems start to go down. And a lot of times, this is what people experience with like sluggish thought and sluggish movement and sluggish muscle tone, sluggish digestion. Everything just kind of gets sluggish. So we want to make sure that we have ample amounts of T3 in the body. So this is really your physiology, and we can, like I said, we can get geeky, and it's kind of cool. If I thought about it, I could actually just taken one of my pictures I've drawn on big old whiteboards and just loaded it. But this is really your simplistic form. You don't have to get so crazy. So we're going to talk about this again at the end, but this is really kind of thyroid physiology. So I wanted to talk about what the thyroid really is responsible for, and this is funny. Whenever I lecture on this topic, I usually tell practitioners, we can probably write all over the hotel walls, with all the things that the thyroid does, because it's endless. When you think about T3 and how T3 goes into every cell in the body, it tells you that every cell can be slowed. So this is why we can see sometimes like bradycardia, or slowness of your heart rate. We can see slowness of metabolism. We see a decrease in like the movement of your gut, and so people can end up with like leaky gut or constipation, gas and bloating. We see a lot of brain fog and difficulty retrieving words and difficulty with memory. We see depression, which is like that kind of sluggishness of your mood. We see weight gain, because if your metabolism isn't working well, then you can increase your weight because you just can't get your metabolism to kick up to burn off that fat. A lot of times we see fatigue and weakness. And then I threw in there Hashimoto's because, if you're not familiar with thyroid conditions in the United States, they say about 90% of thyroid issues are actually autoimmune. And so the autoimmune condition for the thyroid is called Hashimoto's. So there's a lot of people with Hashimoto's. If you look at it, the research shows there's about 24 million people have Hashimoto's, and that's a lot. That's a lot of people. So I would say most of the time when we're dealing with thyroid issues in the office, they tend to be more of the autoimmune variety. A lot of people are like, I've been to different doctors. I'm not too sure where to go. Been to doctor to doctor to doctor. Nobody can figure me out. Those often tend to be more Hashimoto's related. So when you kind of think of thyroid, when you look at hypothyroid or a low thyroid function, just think that every cell in your body is just being turned down. When you look at like hyperthyroid or people with Graves' disease, just think about everything being turned up. So people with Graves' disease, they have like anxiousness. They can't even gain weight. They're losing weight so fast. They can't sleep. They're anxious. They're like twitching and tremors and shaky and jitter. It's everything just got turned up. So that's kind of what your thyroid does. It's kind of like the master control volume, and you can literally turn it all down or you can turn it all up. But really, we want at the end of the day, we want to be like Goldilocks. So it has to be just right. And so this is why when we look at thyroid, we say, what are all the things that can influence or impact thyroid function? Because that really becomes the game. So when we try to figure out why somebody has a abnormal thyroid, we're trying to figure out what are all the players that are involved. So that's what we're going to talk about today is like stress and cortisol, because this is something that is really affecting a lot of people at this moment. With our shelter in place, with the COVID virus and things like that. So we want to kind of just switch it up and let's talk about stress and what we can do. So I wanted to bring into the picture adrenals, and a lot of people have heard of adrenals. Sometimes you hear like adrenal exhaustion or adrenal fatigue. Your adrenals are actually a gland that's on top of your kidneys, and your kidneys are called your renal glands. So AD or adrenals means it's a gland that's on top of your renals or on top of your kidney. So it's like a little triangle gland that sits up there. And it seems really small, but man, it really packs a punch on what it does with physiology. So what I put on here is a couple things that we can talk about. One is cortisol, and cortisol is your stress hormone. So as you are stressed out, your adrenals are activated. When you exercise, your adrenals are activated. When you try to go to bed at night, you basically put your adrenals on alert and you say, hey, you got me, right? I'm going to go to sleep, but you have me in case anything happens. So your adrenals do a lot with things or with you over the day. So cortisol is our major stress hormone that is a result of adrenal function. Now, adrenals also control sodium and potassium. And I threw this on here because this is actually pretty significant. I was doing a report of findings today with a patient, and we were talking about his adrenals, and he has chronic fatigue, really struggling with school. He's waking up at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon because he just has no energy, but he's really dehydrated. So we're talking about the hydration piece, and that's part of your sodium potassium. So when you see people that have low adrenals, they tend to crave salt. Sometimes when you see people have high adrenals, they might crave sugar. So we actually can look at some of these symptoms that people have, and it gives us a lot of clues into what's going on with adrenal function, which then kind of leads us into blood pressure. So when you are regulating or supporting your sodium potassium levels, this has a massive influence into blood pressure. One of the common kind of patterns that you'll see is that if somebody has low adrenals, they tend to have low sodium and then they tend to have low blood pressure. If you think about the opposite, people that have high adrenal function, they tend to hold on to sodium, which is why they don't crave it. They have a lot more swelling and then their blood pressure goes up. So you go to your doctor and the doctor says you have high blood pressure, you need to go on a low sodium diet. So now hopefully some of you are like, oh, that makes sense. This is why, that's why my doctor said to do that, or why you see like these low sodium food products and things like that is for those people, but that tells you that they probably have some high adrenals. So these are some of the things that we look at. Next on the list, I put glucose or blood sugar. And a lot of times with low adrenals, you'll tend to see low glucose. So these people have a hard time kind of maintaining their blood sugar throughout the day and then even in the night. So people with low blood sugar, will have will tend to like wake up in the middle of the night. So by high adrenals, I'm gonna kind of I'll back up a little bit. So it's cool. I love the questions. By high adrenals, I mean like maybe like high stress, high cortisol. So it's probably a good term to use. So high cortisol levels, which we can measure doing a saliva test, high cortisol levels can lead to high sodium retention, which can elevate the blood pressure. So that's your. I'm trying to give like the two opposite ends of the spectrum for people. So hopefully it's not confusing. But usually when the adrenals are low functioning, then everything tends to be on the low side. When you have high cortisol, or so low cortisol, and then you have high cortisol, then you'll see everything tends to be on the high side. So kind of going back to like low cortisol, low adrenals, people struggle to stay asleep because you can't regulate your blood sugar, your blood sugar throughout the night. So people will tend to wake up in the middle of the night. Their mind is racing. They can't seem to go back to sleep. Sometimes they wake up hungry, and that's because you have low cortisol that's not really doing a good job of supporting you during the night. And then with low adrenals, you'll tend to see low energy. This just all kind of comes together. So when we're looking at thyroid issues and trying to tie these two worlds together, we can really, on one hand, say, okay, what's your cortisol like? What are your adrenals like? So if you're kind of somebody that says, yeah, I'm dehydrated all the time. I have low blood pressure, low blood sugar, low energy, and I'm waking up all the time, there's probably a good possibility that you have low adrenal function and you have some kind of adrenal imbalance. On the flip side, if you have swelling and water retention, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, and usually those people have a hard time going to sleep, then that also can be a sign. So when we kind of tie it back into that, into the thyroid, that's why I want to kind of show you some of the areas that we can look at on blood work. And I got a couple examples I could show you. So I wanted to go into some of the causes of stress. So I know this is more kind of thyroid, but I think the stress piece is important, especially now, and also because these are things that we can control. So, for instance, we're going to talk about inflammation, sleep, overtraining, what you actually eat, and then situational stress. So we'll talk about each of these individual. I'm just kind of reading everybody's stuff. So I have Hashimoto's family. Ooh, that's a good question. And before I go on to that, I can answer this question. So it says, "Hi, I have Hashimoto's and recently found that I have low body temperature. Does this indicate my thyroid meds are too low or stress given the current situation?" I think with Hashimoto's, it's really fascinating because Hashimoto's really kind of just puts a whole nother layer on things. And usually with Hashimoto's, people can have actually a mix sometimes of too much thyroid, like symptoms of too much thyroid and symptoms of too little. When you have like low body temp, that definitely goes more with that hypothyroid Hashimoto's. But I think at the end, when we talk about stress, it'll be kind of cool to kind of see where you fall. And I'm kind of hoping too at the end, if you guys have labs or if you've had your thyroid tested, you can kind of look at those numbers and it kind of give you some clues on where to go. So we'll talk about a couple things, and apparently formatting didn't come through very well. So inflammation is some of the inflammation examples I want to give you is like injuries. So when you see like sports injuries, auto accidents, things like that. These are forms of inflammation. And this is why, and I'll kind of keep tying back around to the thyroid. If you ever hear somebody say, ever since my car accident, I have hypothyroidism. Ever since my concussion, I have hypothyroidism. Ever since my infection or my cold or whatever, I have hypothyroid, and nobody will believe me. This is why we start looking at these things, because you can have injuries and concussions, chemical exposures, mold exposures, infections, things like that can actually cause inflammation in the body, and this can then impact how the thyroid functions. A lot of people that have Hashimoto's, these are actually some of the things that we look at, is things like concussions and injuries and chemicals, because those alter your immune system. And when you have inflammation or you have immune dysfunction, these are things that if you have like a predisposition to Hashimoto's, or like they call it a genotype or a genetic predisposition for it, sometimes you can flip that gene on. And I would say probably good 80, 90% of the time, People are kind of talking about how they something happened to them, and then ever since then, they just never had been the same. So inflammation is a big one, and those are things that we tend to look at on blood work. So inflammation markers could be like CRP, homocysteine levels. Those are some of those markers that when you're kind of looking on blood work, you want to see is somebody, do they have a lot of inflammation? Sleep. So sleep, I wanted to put on here. It's important to get a good, like at least a minimum of 7 hours. Even with the kind of the COVID virus, going on right now, actually some of the biggest talks that I've seen around this, and it's kind of nice to tie it into what's going on in our world. Some of the biggest things that I've seen is inflammation and sleep, and actually we'll add stress too. But they're talking; those are some of the things that people can do is make sure they have like good sleep and keeping your stress down and keeping your inflammation down. But it is really fascinating some of the talks around inflammation and some of the people that are struggling to get over COVID. Really, really fascinating information that's out there. But if we go back to sleep, it's really important to get at least a minimum of 7 hours. They say 8 to 9 could be even better. And this is one of the things that we really talk about and focus on, at the very beginning of patient care. Because I've learned over the years, if you can't get somebody to sleep, it feels like an uphill battle because you're trying to get systems working, but your sleep is just messing up your adrenals. And so to have at least some good quality sleep for at least 7 hours is really important. I also put on there some proper sleep habits. I was talking to another patient, and we were talking about changing uh, her sleep patterns because she was like going to bed really late and then getting up really late. And it's really important to actually see the sun. It's important for your brain to see daylight. So I think getting up late and then being more of a night owl is not really the best thing. And you find a lot of times people who are night owls, they tend to watch television, or they sit on their screen, and that's not a good thing because now you're injecting light into your brain while you're trying to go to sleep, and it's really hard to make melatonin if you're just shining a light into your eyeballs. So if you know somebody who's doing this, or if you guys do this, you got to make sure that you're getting that sleep habits in order where you can wake up and you see daylight. Your brain is getting that stimulation from light to produce cortisol and also decrease melatonin. So there's this kind of this nice ratio between the two. I put on sleep too. I put diet and blood sugar. I find this more often than not how many people don't have good quality sleep because of what they eat. If they have, a couple glasses of wine every night, well, that's going to mess up your blood sugar, which is going to mess up your cortisol levels. Or people that have like a huge pasta meal without any like fiber or fat or protein, you're going to mess up your blood sugar, which is, going to throw off your sleep. You even see sometimes in the older population, they actually will eat dinner around like 4 o'clock and then they go to bed at like 10 or 11. Well, that's looking at 6 to 7 hours without eating. So by the time they go to bed, the blood sugars actually drop significantly. So they'll tell me, oh, I can't go, between lunch and dinner without getting hungry and fatigued, which is only maybe 4 or 5 hours. But then they go, you know, 6 to 7 hours at night before they even go to bed. And then they're into a fasting state. So sometimes like actually the time that you eat and the time you go to bed is important. What you eat before you go to bed is important. So these are some of the things that I'll kind of talk about at the end as well. But one of the things that we really ask patients to do is to eat like a good fat and a good protein at night with like a complex carbs like a sweet potato or something like that, because you don't want to create these weird abnormal blood sugar spikes while you're trying to sleep or going to sleep. So if you can get a good fat and a good protein, that actually stabilizes your blood sugar much, much, much better. I put overtraining on here. It's kind of next. And I know there might be some people like, oh, that's impossible. I don't overtrain. I've seen this a lot over the years. I love being in Colorado, but definitely one of the things that you see in Colorado versus many other states is overtraining. So, I've seen people that, will ride their bike to get their hair cut and it's 30 miles away. And I love it. Like, don't get me wrong, I think that's amazing, but I think sometimes when you have a lot of stress in your body, and then if you overtrain, you can actually kind of compound that stress. And some people, you actually find that actually doing like walking and yoga and Pilates and low impact actually has a much bigger impact. You'll also see there's people talking about high intensity training, or they call it HIT training. And so you see a bunch of people now they're doing HIT training, and actually they're showing that has even greater effects on health than like running 50 miles, a day. And I'm being facetious, but there are a lot of people who do run. I remember like years and years and years ago, I was talking with a patient, and she ran 7 to 9 miles a day. And so we had this conversation, and I think she looked at me like I had three eyes. um, and so I was kind of, I told her, I was like, I think you should just do some like low impact, um, training. And she just kind of looked at me like, that's not going to happen. And then she was doing much better. So I didn't see her for like, oh, it was almost 6 months. And then she came back in for a follow up, and I was like, you look great. So I was like, what have you been doing? She's like, oh, I started doing like step aerobics and Pilates. And she's like, I lost 25 pounds. I was like, oh, yeah, that would make sense. So it's just, she was overtraining, and that creates a stress response. And when you're in a stress response, it's really difficult to lose weight. Plus, you can also create inflammation. And I've seen these people at the gym where they look the exact same, and they're running, like 7 miles per hour on the treadmill, sweating up a storm, and not even losing weight. It's like you're creating a lot of stress. So these are some of the things I want to bring. And then what you eat. You have to eat well. I mean, that's especially in this time of stress. I think we don't want to add any more stress. So inflammatory foods are important to really reduce out your diet. And these are things with like MSG and preservatives and things that you can't pronounce on the back of the box or canned good. Those are probably inflammatory foods. Consuming a lot of sugars and candy and cakes and cookies is definitely inflammatory foods. I put processed foods on there as well. I was kind of laughing because during this whole, when people started rushing to the grocery store, I remember going to the grocery store, and I called my wife and I was like, it's actually pretty easy to find food. And she's like, why? I'm like, because nobody's buying the healthy stuff. I was like, the produce is still there, all the organic stuff is still there. So, I mean, I literally walked through the store and went grocery shopping as normal because everybody was just buying all the processed foods. Which then makes you think, okay, everybody's stressed out eating processed foods. This is probably not a good idea. Same thing with alcohol. I think I heard a stat was this morning. They're talking about the percentage. Oh no, is liquor sales went up 55% in the state of Colorado. And I'm like, well, there you have it. So people are eating processed foods, stressed out of their mind, drinking more alcohol. This is probably not good. So reducing your inflammation is good. Decreasing the processed foods, eliminating them, decreasing your alcohol, high carbs, and you got to get more fiber in your diet. Eating some more greens and fibrous foods are really where it's at. So I'll kind of keep that short because I think everybody kind of knows what to do, and I kind of want to move on to stress. I don't have any bullet points in here. Where I kind of wanted to kind of leave it is that I I think we live in a super, super stressful time, right now. And it's hard to watch patients, it's hard to watch friends and family. And we all have stories, and stories of others. So I think it's probably important, like during this situational stress, like we have to keep ourselves as healthy as possible because there's certain things we can control and there's certain things we can't. But situational stress, whether it be, a job that is just rough, a marriage that is not great. I know in my world, we have a kid with special needs. I have a mother-in-law that has dementia. So our world can get stressful. So we try to, do really well at eating healthy and going for walks and going to the gym, because life is hard. And I think as I get older, you kind of meet everybody. Life is not easy. So I think situational stress is one of those big things that this is why we have a counselor in the office. It's because there's a lot of stress out there. And so that's one of our pieces in getting people well is the mental health side, to deal with some of the situations or to get people out of situations or how to cope with situations. So I think it's a really important piece. Then that's why I didn't put any bullets up there because it's just a good talking point. All right. So then the question is, how does stress affect the thyroid? So we kind of been talking about stress. I felt like that was kind of a big piece to really touch on. But this is where it impacts the thyroid. So what you'll see is I have two red arrows. One of them is towards the pituitary, and the other one is between T4 and T3. When I give these 3-day lectures, I feel like a broken record. And even when I'm on the radio and we talk about thyroid, I feel like a broken record. Stress is just evil. It plays a massive role by inhibiting. It actually decreases function of the pituitary. Inflammation decreases the pituitary, and there's tons and tons of research on this. So one of the things that if you're looking at your blood work, and I'll show you an example here in a second, but if you're looking at your blood work, how do you know if the pituitary is being inhibited? Well, you look at the TSH. If the TSH is low, then we know that the pituitary is not producing as much as it should. Your most common causes all day long, all throughout the literature, is stress and inflammation. Now, if you even go up higher into the brain, into the hypothalamus, there's actually tons of research that shows that stress and inflammation also inhibit the hypothalamus, right? So, this is a big piece that at the very start of thyroid physiology, stress and inflammation play a massive role. The second piece that we want to look at is the T4 to T3 conversion. Now, most of this conversion, like 60% of this conversion, actually takes place in your liver. So, a lot of people don't probably realize that. So, 60% is in your liver. Another 20% of conversion takes place in your digestive system. So, 80% of your T4 to T3 conversion takes place in your liver and in your gut. Now, stress, what it does is inhibits, there's an enzyme that helps to break down one of the iodine molecules from T4 into T3. And stress actually inhibits and decreases that enzyme. And so that enzyme is actually inhibited in the liver. Now, we can also look at it and say stress also affects our gut. Stress causes ulcers. Stress causes bloating. Stress causes food allergies. And stress causes detoxification issues in the liver. So not only does it impact the organ itself in the system, but it actually impacts the enzyme that breaks down the T4 into T3. And actually, I could probably add in one more arrow where stress actually impacts T3 going into the cell. So there's actually specific receptor sites that are made for T3, and stress actually changes those receptor sites, so it makes it hard for T3 to go inside the cell. So it's really fascinating that if you look at thyroid physiology, there's two, and I gave you a third. There's three places that stress impacts the whole entire thyroid function. So when you have a car accident and then you end up with like a low metabolism, or you gain weight, or you go through like a stress response, or a bad marriage, or a divorce, or a really hard job that's has a lot of stress involved in it. This is why you see people like, ever since that job I've gained weight, ever since that job my hair falls out, ever since this situation my eyebrows have thinned. Those are all different types of things that you go, okay, this has got to be stress related. So I wanted to show you, this is kind of an example. So I gave you, I just copied this from a couple patients today, but this is kind of a cool example of, if you look, the TSH. So I like this range. If you look at the range in yellow, that 1.8 to 3, I know it's a really narrow range for the TSH, but I really like it. I found it to be very beneficial, and I've been doing this for 16 years. So TSH at 1.15, that's almost like classic of what you see with low TSH. And then if you look, the T4 is at 5.7. So if you're not stimulating the thyroid enough, then you can't make enough T4. In this case, the person's actually kind of doing an okay job of getting it over to T3. But if you look at the range of T3 of 100 to 180, they're sitting on the bottom, right? So I could probably ask the question, how many people think this is hypothyroidism? And hopefully nobody raises their hand, because this is actually not. But people will feel like they have hypothyroidism. It's almost the exact same symptoms, it's just a different cause. So we know the thyroid gland is not the cause. It's actually coming from the pituitary. And so that's when you look at stress and you look at inflammation. So these numbers on the thyroid tell you, they almost give you the story and they give it away with what's going on with the patient. So I'll even back up a little bit. So now you can see that with the pituitary, it makes TSH and the thyroid makes T4. So if the pituitary is not working as well as it should, the TSH will be low, the thyroid will be low, and the T4 will be low as a result. And it's really kind of that simple. I think sometimes people make this way harder than it needs to be. Here's another example, and I just showed you so TSH is 2.29, so that's actually a great number. T4 is 6.7, so it's good, kind of on the low end. And then T3, you see, is below 100. So it tells you that the T4 to T3 conversion is actually decreased. So this is why we love those functional ranges. When you look at the ranges that are a little bit more to the right, those are your traditional medical ranges, and they're really big, and they're meant to be big because they're looking for pathology. But what we're trying to look at is what is function? What's the function like? And so the column that you see that has a yellow in it, that's more of your function, where the outside range is more of conditions. So this is somebody that would say, man, I just don't feel great. I don't, my doctor says everything is normal, but I just don't feel great. I feel sluggish. My hair kind of falls out. I'm not super bad, but I just don't feel right. And that's kind of what you hear with this kind of story. And then the third one that I gave you was actually more, I kind of wanted to show you what a hypothyroid looked like. And this is where the TSH starts going up. So I've seen TSH, oh man, as high as, I think the highest I've seen is 330. I've seen TSH as like 25, 60, 70s, hundreds. I mean, it's kind of crazy. So this is not super high, but this is also somebody that might say, I just don't feel quite right. So this is your TSH at 3.8. So if your TSH is high, then that actually means that your pituitary is doing its job because the T4 is normal, but it's actually sending down enough thyroid stimulating hormone to keep the system rolling. But there still has to be a cause to all of this. So I wanted to kind of show you a couple of values. If you're looking at your own blood work and you're like, hey, do I have some stress that's related or stress that's causing my thyroid issues? I wanted to show you like TSH. I really like the value of 1.8 to 3. Even when I started lecturing, I remember this was a value that we had talked about, and I remember it got kind of poo-pooed by people. I remember there's medical professionals are like, that's just ridiculous. And now I've even seen the medical world actually go 1 to 2. So I've seen a lot of docs now telling their patients they want their TSH between 1 and 2. But I still love this 1.8 to 3. I think it's a really good range. Everybody could be a little bit different, give or take, and how they feel. But if you see low TSH, I would say that's a good indicator of some stress. And then if your T3 is below 100, then I would say we're probably also looking at some stress. So just really simple. You can just pull out your blood work and look at it and go, oh, I have some stress. And this, I just threw this up here not to really show you a pattern, but I wanted to show you there's actually a lot of markers to look at. If you really want the full picture of your thyroid, this is actually something you would run. And these are different values because they're by a different company, but you'll see there's T3, T4, free T3, free T4, TSH. There's TPO antibodies, and there's TG antibodies that looks at Hashimoto's, and then there's reverse T3. And actually, reverse T3 is another marker that the research shows that reverse T3 will go up with stress. So I've now given you like 4 areas of the thyroid that are impacted by stress alone. So if you ever go to your doc, this is actually a good thing. You say, hey, doc, can you run all of these markers? Because if you want to know exactly what's going on with your thyroid, these are the markers to run. And it'll tell you if it's stress. Or I'll back up. I'll tell you, here's all the things that we look for. And this is what I've lectured on over the years. When we look at these numbers, I can tell you if this is related to testosterone, estrogen dominance, cortisol, inflammation, thyroid, autoimmune, liver, gut. I can tell you a lot just by looking at all these numbers. So if you know a doc and they're willing to work with you, this is a great panel to run. So in conclusion, with my formatting that didn't work, go into the webinar. So here's the next steps I would say. Let's see. That's a good point. Somebody just messaged. If you guys don't have, I'm gonna back up. That's a great point. If you don't have access to a doctor that is willing to help you out, there's definitely a lot of functional medicine practitioners out there. I mean, obviously I'm here too, but you guys can go to. There's a lab called directlabs.com. That'd been cool if I can add this. I'll add it down here. Thank you, Jody. So I'm going to add a website in here. It's called directlabs.com. Directlabs.com, they actually, it's a really cool lab that you can actually go and order your own blood work. And then you print off your own requisition form and you go down to LabCorp and you have your blood drawn. There's actually some panels in there. You can actually look up different thyroid panels. And then there's actually some panels that are called Apex Wellness panels. So I'll put that in there too. So you can look up thyroid panels and called Apex Wellness panels. Those are two things that I will look at. It's kind of cool. And then you can take those, those labs to a doc or find a functional medicine practitioner. But that's a great point. All right, let me switch slides. There we go. So in conclusion again. All right, so what's your next steps? Basically I always tell patients there's things that we can control and there's things that we cannot control. And there's things like for instance, shelter in place, we can't control that, So, and some people losing their jobs, we can't control that. And people getting sick, there's definitely things that we can't, but there are things we can. And that's what we need to focus on. So we need to look at ways of reducing our stress. So looking at things like meditation, deep breathing, journaling. Apparently counseling is spelled wrong, but counseling, I know I'm going to see my counselor next week because I think it's important to say, like, I just want to check in. I need to make sure like I'm doing okay. Just a self check is great. I've been doing walks and, every day I've been trying to play disc golf with my daughter just to get out there and get some sun and get some movement. So there's things that we can do, exercising, go for walks, Pilates, yoga. There's so many trainers right now, and I've talked to them that they can't work at the moment. And so they're doing online classes. There's a bunch of these online videos. There was one of the patients said her Zumba instructor is just doing a Zoom Zumba class, and just having everybody go on there and she's just teaching a class. There's a lot of stuff that we can do. One of the things that we've been telling doctors, because I have a coaching program for doctors too, is telling doctors not to be reclusive. Don't curl up in a ball. You got to like push through this and we got to be creative. And I think that's what a lot of people are doing is not curling up in a ball, but saying, okay, can we walk, reconnect with friends? I've seen like apps, where people are actually getting together and having fun and playing games. The other night we actually played games with a bunch of people over Zoom, and actually one person we all like got in on it with our cell phones, and we hung out with each other and laughed and played a game on Zoom. So there are super creative ways to reduce our stress and to kind of reconnect, and that's what I really encourage you guys to do. From a dietary standpoint, good fat and good protein is a really good way to go. So that's some of the least things you can do. When I was at the grocery store, there was like wild caught salmon on sale. A fillet was like $5.99. Unfortunately, the bin was super full, which was good for me. But I'm like, nobody's touched this, but all the canned goods were gone. So that's good fat. There's good proteins that you guys can definitely work on. I've been in the grocery store this last weekend and it was packed full of food and supplies, so I mean, we can do stuff. So I just don't want you guys to curl up in a ball. We got to be creative and look out for each other, and then decrease your simple carbs. It's an easy time to drink wine and eat ice cream. And it's funny. I've been talking to patients and they're like, "I'm making an apple pie today," and I'm like, "This is awesome." So it's almost like everybody's getting back to their baking roots, and it's awesome. But just be cool, be cautious, and make sure you're taking care of yourself. Lastly, I'm going to kind of mention, so if you guys like this talk, one of the things that we do, the three of us, we're on a radio show every Monday. So you guys can go to KLZ. And so we're kind of rotating through. So I think Monday, Jake is going to do some talks. And then I think he's going to do a talk next Tuesday. I think Dr. Maynard's going to do another talk next week. So definitely keep in touch with us. You can go to Facebook, you can go at Integrated Brain Centers and Integrated Health. Go to our Facebook page because we're definitely posting, anytime we're doing a webinar on those channels, and they're also sending them out, via email and all our patient contacts as well. So we're kind of all over social media because we're all sitting, inside our homes and doing things remotely. So I wanted to put on there, if you guys know anybody, or if you need a free 30-minute consultation for new patients, just a call. You can talk to any of us. Jake's taking new clients, and people who are struggling. So that's why I told Jake, I was like, I really want you to be in the forefront of this because there's a lot of people that are struggling. So Jake is available if you guys need, a chance to meet with him, help. He does a lot of cool breath work and deep breathing, meditative types of techniques. It's actually pretty cool stuff. So he actually can walk you through how to do that. Dr. Maynard knows functional medicine and neurology just as well. So it's a great group of people. We're also doing telehealth. So if a lot of people are like, well, I can't come and see you, we're doing telehealth. So we have that option available. So I've been sitting right here all day, on the phone with patients. Jake's been at his house. Dr. Maynard's been at his house, and the staff, everybody, it's just crazy. It's a new normal for the moment, and we're making it work. So if you are interested in telehealth, we're definitely available for that. We can do histories, we can do workup, we can order labs, we can do everything just about the same. So again, we're doing free 30-minute consultations. If you're ever interested, we can do blood work for you, or anybody you know. So I'm really excited that you guys were here this evening, and I'm going to ask. Let me see if I think there's a couple questions. If one is taken too high of a thyroid dose, does it generally raise blood pressure? Not necessarily. Like, too much of a thyroid dose not doesn't really kind of pertain too much to blood pressure. Sometimes you can feel like an increase in heart rate, but if blood pressure, I would say, might be more related to, could be stress. I'd probably look more at stress than I would the thyroid dosage. Um, I like how Scott's not overtraining. That's good. Um, Yeah, and I think when you guys looking at, like, another thing was like looking at outdoor lights and things like that. I have a neighbor too that has like really bright lights. It sometimes makes it hard when you're trying to go to sleep. I think when you're kind of looking at overtraining and things like that, make sure you're doing stuff to keep your brain from being stimulated. When you're going to bed, bright lights, TVs, screens, those things like that can really kind of activate your brain. So we want to make sure that everybody is good. So I think I talked fast, and I apologize. Like I said, this is just such a big topic, and we kind of wanted to address it. I remember last week we were talking, and Ruth was like, we should do stress and thyroid because everybody is really stressed out, and there's probably a lot of thyroid issues going on. So I was like, all right, that sounds great. So let's do it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. It's great seeing some of you guys on the webinar. Makes me happy. So um, yeah, patients are awesome, and you guys are just great. So I hope you guys have an awesome evening. If you need some help, reach out. If you guys need some immune support, reach out. We're even doing just phone calls, 5-minute phone calls. If you guys need some ideas on immune supplements, immune support, there's definitely a list of those. And we even have like an online store that we got started for some of you guys too. So whatever you guys need, reach out at info@integratedhealth.com, Dr. Stedman at integratedhealthdenver.com. We're definitely here to help you. So I hope you have a great night and be safe, be healthy, and we'll talk to you again soon.